and allow introductions in a little bit, but I want to first allow Melissa to welcome everybody to the call.
Yeah, thank you, Hal. And so we're kind of getting used to our virtual interface here. So maybe a little awkward here at the beginning, but I really appreciate everyone that was able to join us today. The goal of this particular tag meeting is to provide you with an opportunity to check in prior to our commission meeting, which is coming up on May 10th and 11th. I did want to make sure that we had communicated back to the tag that Thomas Eason, our acting executive director, did have an opportunity to check in with our chairman, Chairman Barretto. And the chairman has indicated that he really does want to see draft rules at this commission meeting, and that he wants to see both of the options that we have discussed with you previously. I will say that this is the beginning of the rulemaking process, and we are going to go through some of the feedback that we've already heard from you and try to make sure that we are representing the tag's feedback on all of the options that have been presented. And again, very beginning process of rulemaking. I think one of the things that we will probably stress at that commission meeting is the need for ample time to complete rulemaking, so that this wouldn't be something that we would do very quickly. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Hal and Raphael to talk through some of the ground rules and get staff and tag member introductions here.
Okay, let me do a couple of ground rules first before we do the intros. Note, we're going to be trying to do this as similar to a tag meeting as we can. And David, I see your hand up on your ears. Is that because you're having a hard time hearing us? Just double checking. I assume everyone else can hear us well. I don't hope that's just David's computer.
Can we double check that? Can somebody
just give us a thumbs up if you're hearing us fine?
Thank you. So David,
I'm assuming David, I think we're at high volume. I don't know if there's anything you can do at your end to raise your volume.
Could your speakers be muted, David?
All right. Well, David, let me go ahead, and if I can, David, I'll continue and talk as loud as I can without my neighbors here irritating them. Again, we're going to run this as close as we can to a tag meeting. Like our tag meetings, the focus is on you, the tag members. It's an open meeting, so we have allowed the public in, but the controls are different, and so they're limited. We're not allowing kind of access to the public for cameras and mics. We do appreciate the public listening in, and we know we have quite a few, and we value their listening in. We will provide at the end of the meeting, much like we do at a tag meeting, an opportunity for public comment. We'll offer an email address that the public can send their comments in directly, and they will be included in, as we always do, in our meeting reports and made available to members and to the staff. So the other one big difference between this and our usual tag meetings is time is short. So to the extent possible, please be concise in your comments, questions, and there will be moments during the presentation, or rather during the conversation. There's not going to be a formal presentation up on the screen. It's mostly Melissa and Sara offering review of your feedback in preparation for the upcoming commission meeting. And you'll have a chance to sort of offer some clarifications or questions for clarification. We'll do that instead of having name tents to raise. What Teams offers you is a raised hand feature, which all of you should have at the top of your screen here across the icons at the top. I'm going to ask real quick, would each of you go ahead and click on that raised hand just to kind of be sure it's working for everybody? Go ahead and click on it for right now. I'm sure everybody can find that. And okay, I really appreciate that. See.
I didn't see a hand.
Well, anybody have any difficulty finding that?
Speak, because we won't.
Go ahead and let us know if you're having trouble with it.
Yeah, there you go.
Not hearing anything, I'm going to assume you can't. Now, for some reason, you really can't get in. You can wave your hand and somebody will see your camera if we need to. Excuse me. And then you'll need to we'll try to assist you, but try to remember to take them down. If not, I think we have some people who can help assist in doing that. The other thing I wanted to know is, we probably should have said this at the beginning. We're going to record this meeting. So Michaela, if you want to be sure we've returned the recording on, should have done that before letting Melissa intro, but better late than never. So you may get a little ping saying you're being recorded for this meeting. Again, value the public being here. We'll give you an opportunity with an email address at the end to provide additional comments. Members, when you are given a chance, or when we call on you, you raise your hands. There'll be points at which we will be able to take your comments. I'll call on you like one at a time. The hands will pop up in the order on the screen. I'll call on you. State your name again whenever you offer comments, because not everybody will know who's speaking. We are encouraging you to keep your cameras on to the extent you can. I know maybe some of you may have something going on in the background that you think is distracting. We understand that, but to the extent feel like you're participating in the meeting by keeping your cameras on. Any ground rules that I've not covered that we need to? All right. In terms, let's go ahead and do before I do the introductions, or before I do the agenda review, let's go ahead and do introductions. And I'm going to kind of call on you one at a time as you appear here on the screen. And it's sort of in alphabetical order, I think. Alyssa, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Sorry, multitasking at the moment. I'm Alyssa Miller-Hurley. I'm with the Pet Advocacy Network. We represent members of the greater pet trade and terrestrial animals.
Thank you. Jessica Clausen?
She's not a tag
Oh,
member.
She's not, I'm sorry. David? Can you hear us, David Arnold?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. David Arnold, Environmental Groups.
Okay. Eugene, you want to introduce yourself?
Technically, I got 2 tickets because I found a better seat after the first ticket I bought.
They still be on mute, Eugene.
So I have 2 tickets.
Good morning, everybody. Eugene Bessette, USARK, Florida. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Eugene. Chris Farrell.
Go by myself.
Chris Farrell, representing environmental interests.
So all the tickets are gone. So
Gino Evans.
Gino Evans, President, Florida Aquaculture Association.
Okay. Jeff Turner.
piece of shit.
Jeff Turner, representing Marine Life and Environmental Aquaculture.
Man, we don't have time
Thank
to
you.
do it.
Jennifer.
This meeting, but you're at minute 10, and it's just a bunch of
Jennifer
boomers
Leon,
confused
representing
about whether or
Union
not their
Entrance.
mics on, cameras
Joe?
on, background noise.
Joe Hayduk, representing the USARK Florida Terrestrial Pet Hobbyists.
John Sajak.
John Sajadat, representing small zoos.
And John Brangan.
John Brangan, Florida Association of Zoos and Aquariums, representing large zoos.
Okay. Mike Kirkland.
Good morning, Mike Kirkland, representing state and federal interests.
Okay. Christy.
Christy D. Spain with Zufari, representing small zoos.
Okay. Marty Tanner.
Marty Tanner, Florida Tropical Fish Farmers Association.
Thanks. Lynn.
Lynn McDuffie, representing Florida Association of Zoos and Aquariums.
And Jennifer Novak. Or
Well,
oh,
Novak.
sorry.
it is. Congratulations.
It
Oh,
is
I'm
Novak.
sorry.
Well, it's fine. It's fine. I'm Jenny Novak, and I'm representing a local government.
Thanks, Jeff.
I think you missed Jeff Hill.
Jeff, did I skip you?
Yep.
Jeff Hill.
Jeff Hill.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jeff Hill, University of Florida, representing academic interests. I have David Rollins here with me.
Okay, great.
You
Thanks.
want-
Appreciate your letting us know that too. And I'll depend on you to raise your hand for him as well. So, and Phil, for some reason, I think I skipped over you.
Yep, Phil Goss, United States Association of Reptile Keepers, representing Florida herpetoculture.
And Sandy Moore.
Sandy Moore with Segrist Inc., representing the pet industry.
Okay. Did I miss anybody? Art Roybal.
Good morning, everyone. Art Roybal, representing the federal interests.
All right, thanks. And Ryan?
Ryan Shelp, representing ornamental fish and aquaculture for the Florida Tropical Fish Farms Association.
Okay. We got Jeff Hill. Christina Romagusa. Christina, are you on?
She's muted. No, I'm not. I had hit raise hand instead of the mute. Christina Romagosa, University of Florida, representing research interests.
I'm not sure if I missed anybody. Is Eric Eccles on? Okay. And Ben Daltrey. Okay, they may be the only two missing at this point. All right. Again, let me let you know on our agenda, following the ground rules here and the intros. For today, staff is going to review the options 1 and 2 that you heard last time and review that feedback with you. They want to ensure that they are reflecting it accurately. And so they want to help in being sure they clarify and are representing your feedback accurately. We're not really going to sort of discuss those as a debate of the values of them as much as they want to be sure they're accurate in their feedback that they heard at our last meeting. They're also going to go back through and look and review the risk assessment process and the feedback you gave them on that as well. And then they're going to look and give you a staff recommendation that they will want you to actively give them some response to, and then review the quote, what they heard at the last meeting about, quote, a blacklist, clarity on what you meant by that in the conversation we had last time. Before we end today, we'll definitely do a round robin and give each one of you a chance for some final comments. But that's really the quick point. Again, at each of those stages, we'll stop and pause, take your hands that are raised, and get some comments and additional clarity from you at those key points. Any questions about the agenda for today? Again, remind you, our time on the video here is pretty short. Please be as concise as you can. State your name when you begin speaking. Raise your hands. We'll call on you when we get to those points at which we can take the comments. With that, I'll turn it over to Sara.
Thanks, Hal. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for making time to join us today. I'm going to first start by reviewing the first option that we discussed at the last tag meeting and then cover some of the feedback that we think we heard from you all at that meeting. And I think at that point, we'll probably pause, make sure that we got that right, and see if there's any clarification necessary on the feedback we got from our tag members. So as a quick reminder, the first option that we discussed applies to non-native fish and wildlife species that are not documented in commerce in Florida, and this would restrict importation of any new undocumented species. So species currently in commerce would maintain a regulatory status quo unless a future risk determination necessitates reclassification. So that's just a quick overview of what option 1 was about. And so now I want to go over some of the feedback that we heard from the tag members, and then we'll pause for clarification, additional thoughts or responses. So we did consensus testing on both of the options. And just as a reminder on that, the consensus testing indicated some level of support for this option from some of our tag members, specifically state, federal, local government, environmental, and humane interest groups were generally supportive of this approach. Exhibitors and industry representatives did have minor or major reservations about this approach. Additionally, marine and freshwater fish industries voiced concern over not being able to import new species quickly under this option. According to these stakeholders, this importation restriction could affect businesses' competitiveness, and these industries rely on importation of new species to improve genetic stock, increase volume of stock, or supplement existing stock. Another piece of feedback that we heard was that zoos and exhibitors suggested the list of species in commerce should include animals that are used in cooperative breeding programs that might not necessarily be sold or not typically sold. We also heard that industry representatives are concerned that some less popular or rare species may not be captured on the list of species documented as in commerce, and that could impact some hobbyists. We also heard that some tag members suggested FWC identify genera or family groups in commerce as opposed to the species level, while others on the tag suggested the species level is an appropriate level to identify non-native species in commerce accurately. And the last thing I wanted to cover for feedback from the tag was that the tag requested language clearly identifies that transshipments do not leave the port of entry, that do not leave the port of entry should not be impacted by this option since these packages never enter the state of Florida. So that covers the overview of the feedback, Hal.
Okay. Again, note, we're giving you that overview of the feedback to be sure that the staff understood your concerns accurately. This isn't quite like the last time they came to you and said, hey, here's our actual presentation to the commission, because that's still under development. That's still being worked on. And in order to do that, they want to be sure they're getting your feedback accurately. So does anybody have any questions about what you just heard? Any clarification that you would like to add to that to tell staff? And as the hands pop up, they'll appear in the order I think that they are offered. So Sandy, I've got you first. And again, Sandy, give your name and then please let us know your comment.
Sure. Sandy Moore, excuse me, I have a cold. So my comment regarding importation of new species for aquaculture, for the fish industry. Another key point in that is that the distribution of new species is important to keep the industry relevant. Without access to those, the importers and distributors quickly become irrelevant if we don't have the same access as our competitors in other states, California, New York, Illinois, because they don't have the same restrictions.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Bill, I got your hand is next.
Yeah, just a quick point. I believe Sara called that option number 1 at the last tag. They were interpretation 1 and 2. I just was wondering if there was a reason for that nomenclature change, or if it's going to change at the commission meeting to option instead of interpretation.
Yeah, we will use option for the commissioners.
Okay. Bill, was there any follow-up question to that, or is that?
Is there a reason for that, or just that's no reason? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I was distracted.
Okay. Joe Paducki?
Joe, I do. A couple comments. We need a definition of what's considered documented in trade. I don't believe pet owners have a requirement to keep documentation on that if they don't engage in commerce. Number 2, there was discussion about Florida aquaculture may not quickly have access to new species. I would change that to at all, because exporters around the world are not going to sit on product for 6 months waiting for a risk assessment to be done when they can ship it anywhere else in the world.
And just to clarify, Jim, in case others, you were saying change that from that limited part to at all, meaning everybody.
It's essentially yes. I mean,
okay.
Granted, yes, maybe they could be imported 6 months or a year down the road, but that product is not going to be available at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Hal, could I ask
Yeah,
a clarification on that?
Please.
Thank you, Joe, for your thoughts on that. I just want to make sure I understand. So when you're suggesting change, what I had said about the ability to import new species quickly, you're suggesting it be changed to not being able to import new species at all. It's the time frame, I think, that is the concern you're voicing. Is that right?
Yes. So yes, we wouldn't be able to do it quickly, and by not being able to import them in a timely manner, those species may not be available. Potentially they could be the following season, but there might not be any reason to import them at that time because they're already elsewhere.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, because I heard et al. Rather than
yeah, I wasn't sure if it was et al. Or
okay.
at all, so we'd have that clarified. Thanks, Joe.
All right, Jennifer Leone.
Forgive me if I misheard this. I believe you said that many people in the group, many members of the group supported interpretation 1. And I did I copied down the count from that, vote, for lack of a better phrase. And a majority of the group had some level of support for level 1. Only 9 members of the group could not support interpretation 1, whereas 14 members on some level could support it. And so I think that needs to be clarified, or at least commented on, because I don't want it to once again seem like it's just opposing sides falling on either end of the spectrum. I thought that interpretation 1 actually allowed for people who might fall more in the middle to be supportive of this option.
And I think we can be specific and say wholehearted support, and minor reservations, so that it's clear what those levels of support were.
Okay. Thank you.
Alyssa, your hands up.
Yeah, I think the clarification, or what you just said in terms of, wholehearted support, reservations, etc. Because I do, I think on Jennifer's comment, there were a majority, but I do know, when speaking for Pet Advocacy Network, when we raised our hand, we raised it when given the option, essentially, of the 2 interpretations presented, which is the one that, if forced to, you could live with. And that interpretation 1 was the one that we indicated, of the 2, if we're forced to deal with either one of those 2, interpretation 1 is really, I think, the best option out of 2 not great options. And so just clarifying that. But I do have a quick question on the, I guess, interpretations or options. Regarding the in-trade, I do want clarification on how we're going to be doing that list. If that's going to be the kind of hastily compiled list that we were able to provide in a few weeks, or if there would be a process similar to what had in Michigan, where they were given a year to come up with that list in order to be as comprehensive as possible.
So actually, that's a great segue, because we did want to talk a little bit about lists and how we're trying to generate those. And we don't believe, I think we indicated this at the tag, we don't believe that we will have a final list ready for the May commission meeting. And so this will be a topic of discussion with the commissioners, the difficulty of generating a list quickly, and the potential pitfalls for setting a time frame that's really far out versus setting a time frame that's closer, and how we want to approach that. So I unfortunately don't think that we have great clarity right now on what to tell you related to the, that concept of how long we're going to have to generate a list. But it is a topic that we want to discuss with our commissioners.
Okay. Thanks, Alyssa. Phil, your hand's up.
Yeah, is there an opportunity today to change the votes that we gave at the last tag on if we supported interpretation 1 or 2?
We weren't planning to do any testing today. I think they were just sort of reflecting to you what they heard at the last meeting.
Okay, well, if it's possible to be noted, I would like to change my vote to adamantly do not support option 1 or option 2. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for the good clarification, Phil. Any other comments, questions, clarifications we need to cover before we sort of move into the next section? Sandy.
Yeah, I just wanted to excuse me. I just wanted to have it annotated that we were not given the option of supporting a blacklist.
Okay. Thank you. Gino, your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to reiterate again to everybody, it's that as far as aquaculture goes, we have all this in place. We have our list in place with FDACs, and we need to sit down with the aquaculture stakeholders and FDACs and FWC if FWC wants to talk about any kind of changes to what we already do. But again, we already did all this. It's all laying in place. Maybe there needs to be an aquaculture and a reptile, 2 different meetings or something, but we really need to get this situated. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Gino. Alyssa, your hand's up again. Is it another comment?
Yeah, it was, I guess, going to be similar to what Phil said. I know you indicated we won't do any more testing today or taking, I guess, the temperature, but we are also against both interpretations, even interpretation 1, and I do want to make sure that that's clear.
Okay, thank you. All right.
If I can just note, you did make that point at the meeting. It is in the summary of the meeting as well, that some of you chose interpretation 1, given the options you were given, and yeah, as the lesser of 2 evils, and you would have preferred a different wording for that 3rd bullet point on the list. That point was made at the meeting and is in the summary.
Okay. Marty.
Yeah, I would just like to go on record as saying I agree with both Gino and Sandy. It was kind of a forced venue that we were just given the options of option 1 and 2 and not given the opportunity to present the possibility of a 3rd option blacklist. And I'm going to use kind of a obscene example. It'd be like getting the choice of being put to death with lethal injection or being poured put in a gas bath and being lit on fire. I mean, it wasn't, again, I just want to go on record, neither one of those 2 options, even though it was kind of a forced venue, were very palatable. I think we need to readjust and look at the possibility of a 3rd more palatable option and the possibility of a blacklist, like Gino said, that we've already got in place.
Sure. And understand 2 quick things. They were basically presenting back to you what they heard from the commission. It wasn't the staff presenting you, hey, these are your only options. They were presenting back to you for feedback, the options that they heard the commission. And so they want to be able to respond to the commission with your concerns. In terms of the blacklist, I noted in our quick agenda review, verbally at least, that further down a little while, they're going to be coming back and asking you for a little more clarification on that blacklist conversation that you had at that last meeting. So there'll be an opportunity for you to kind of add some clarification to that here later in the meeting. All right, now I've got a set of 4 here. How about Marty? I think you're the next one. Marty Tanner.
Marty moved us going.
Still up. Oh, I'm sorry, Marty, your hand is still up. Ryan, you're the next one up.
How I understand what you're trying to do and where you're at, and I think where people got uncomfortable here and why they're wanting to reiterate their positions is that we went from these were two interpretations of what we thought the commissioner said, to now these are two options that we are presenting to the commission. And that's why this is getting such a vehement pushback here, is that everybody feels like that was a little bit of a bait and switch, that we were told these were just interpretations and now there are two options being presented. So I get where you're going and I understand, but that is why you're seeing a little bit of defensive posturing here.
Okay. Appreciate that, Ryan. Jeff, your comment for clarification?
Yes, thank you. So with the scale, this acceptability scale that we used, I think there might have been some confusion. There was discussion that somehow that this is interpreted, the outcome was interpreted as there being majority support for option 1 within the scaling system. You know, the first two are support, the second two are reservation. I think people get confused over what's a minor reservation versus what you absolutely wouldn't support. I'm not saying that we need to go back and score things, but the idea that 7 supports versus 16 by my count reservations, I would actually say that's more of a negative than is a positive for that one. It may be more positive than the second one, but that's my interpretation. People, I think, got some confusion over what's minor reservations and where it fits into this scale.
Sure, I understand. Appreciate that. And before I take the last hand here, let me go back and reiterate something. We're getting a lot of public who are listening in today trying to raise hands, and again, we're running this. This is a tag meeting where we're focused on the tag members and the tag conversation, just like we would at our regular tag meetings. We do appreciate the public listening in, and you will be given an email address at the end before we end the meeting today to offer those comments, much like we do in a tag meeting where you're able to put it up on the sheets at the back, and they'll be incorporated into the meeting reports, and staff will make sure that the members get those comments as well. But again, like a tag meeting, we're all focused on the tag members with our limited time today. Joe, your hand's up. Joe Haduki.
Okay, yeah, Joe Hajduk. I believe it was at the last tag meeting when we were discussing the two different interpretations that it came up that sometimes staff is given direction, but sometimes has to go back to the commissioners and kind of give them feedback about what they view as possible or practical. So, you know, we're hearing that you want to present interpretations 1 and 2, but I just want to be clear. I feel like there was at least as much support for a third option, which would be an expanded blacklist, as there was for either of the two options that we looked at and discussed at the previous meeting. So maybe this is a situation where staff does need to push back a little bit on the commissioners and say, we understand what you're asking for, but we feel like we have a more practical solution.
Okay, and thanks, Joe. Let me reiterate in our agenda here. Once we've had this conversation, the next 3 things on our agenda list here are sort of review the risk assessment process and the feedback you gave, but also I think staff wants to come to you with a recommendation that they want to get your feedback on, and also talk about and get some clarity from you on what many of you meant by the blacklist. So those conversations, I think, thank you for raising them. Bear with us and see if we don't get to some of your questions here further in the agenda. And if we don't, there clearly is a round robin here at the end that you'll have a chance to add kind of clarity on all of what you've heard today. So hold those questions and bear with us on that one. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and say let's move on to Sarah and Melissa to your next.
Okay. You have Joe with a hand up.
Well, that was Joe who I think just finished.
Right.
I think.
Good. It was. All right. So just to recap what the second option was, it applies to non-native fish and wildlife species that FWC has not evaluated for risk in Florida and FWC has determined are not sufficiently regulated. This option restricts importation of any unevaluated non-native fish and wildlife species. Species that have been evaluated would maintain the regulatory status quo unless a future risk determination necessitates reclassification. So that's the option that we presented on the slide last time. for option 2. So going through very quickly the feedback that we had from the tag, all members of the tag identified either minor or major reservations with this option. Several of our tag members identified significant concerns and referred to it as unworkable. So we will make sure that we're including that level of concern in what we provide to the commissioners. There is concern that it could put multiple industries or businesses out of business in Florida, including pet industry, aquaculture, and the marine aquarium trade. It does still allow for breeding of unevaluated species within the state, and breeders could continue to produce tens of thousands of individuals that are sourced within Florida. And then we also had someone that pointed out that a person might not be able to import a pet species, but then they could turn around and buy the same species once they were within the state. Not having the ability to supplement in-state stock with imported individuals of a species could be devastating to aquaculture in the event of a cold snap that could kill inventory. The comment here was specific to aquaculture, but I think that the same is probably true for other user groups there. And several tag members did suggest that this option would support large box stores and put smaller scale producers out of business. One member did note that this option would have a severe impact to aquaculture, but potentially has less of an impact to the reptile trade because much of the reptile breeding does occur in Florida. Several of you mentioned concerns that if we put together a list that it's potentially a static list of unevaluated species and we wouldn't move into a process where we could evaluate those and move them into other categories. And then some suggested that including an exemption from the risk determination process for species that are considered innocuous would be an option. We didn't really discuss that in depth, but that was something that was suggested. So those were the primary comments that we had.
So again, in order to use our time wisely, if you heard your comment or your concern was captured accurately, thank you. If there's some need to clarify something or you think something was missing. And I've got a couple hands. Let's start with Sandy. Sandy, I think yours was the first hand.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, both options will be industry killers. One is just quicker than the other.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Jennifer, yours was the next hand.
I assume that's Jen Leon.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry. I'm not used to you calling me Jennifer. It throws me off. I just want to clarify that although I could support this, but with strong reservations, my reservations are not going to be the same as maybe members of the industry. And they might, and in some cases they were the same, but my reservations, and I think others may be that it was impractical and would be very difficult, if not impossible to enforce and difficult to follow through with this, as well as the risk assessment process. So I was the one who brought up the innocuous species that we wouldn't want to clog up the system. So I just want to make sure that when this is presented to the commission, that yes, nobody could support this, but it was for a variety of reasons, not just the reasons that the industry has. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Ryan, you're next.
So two things. One, we talked about that it would work for big box retailers, but it would be very devastating to independent retailers. You talked about small producers, and I think that's true both. Big business usually is easier than small business, but yeah, the death of independent retail is one of the things that we were concerned about on there. And the other thing for clarification for those who might have forgotten, to be considered previously evaluated by FWC, that would only be prohibited, conditional, class 1, class 2, or venomous species, correct?
Correct.
I don't think we included venomous.
Actually, yeah, you're right.
So class 1, class 2, conditional and prohibited. Thanks for that, Ryan.
Thank you. So venomous would not be, because the venomous is evaluated, right?
Yeah, those were the regulatory classifications that we discussed at the last tag meeting. We did not discuss venomous.
All right.
Thank you.
Joe, you're the next hand.
I would just like to request that when this is presented to the commissioners, give them the numbers. You know, don't just say species that need to be evaluated, would not be in trade, please let them know. If I recall correctly, the number of species that have been evaluated is about, if I recall correctly, the number at the last meeting was 205. And I'm not sure which estimate we're using for species in trade, but we're at 30,000, 40,000, somewhere in that area.
Okay. Appreciate that, Joe. Phil, yours is the next team.
Yes, I'm actually going to repeat it anyway because it's a good point. I was going to say the same thing Joe said. We're looking at 30,000 plus species, so the commissioners need to hear those numbers. There's only been 205 species actually evaluated, and also on top of that, I'm not sure if even that 205 has been analyzed by FWC. Those may only be FDACs. So I'm assuming that it's even less than 205 species that have been reviewed by FWC. So we may be looking at 20 or 30 species that have been reviewed by FWC, and most of those are probably already listed as prohibited. So it could be almost 0 species that are going to be allowed in trade. And as Joe just said, the commissioners need to hear those numbers.
Okay. Melissa, yours is the next team.
Yeah, I still have some questions about the legality of this option and the fact that, it could potentially violate, again, the Commerce Clause, and was wondering if there'd been any feedback from FWC legal folks, because again, it does put preferential treatment on Florida distributors and Florida businesses out and limit the ability of interstate commerce.
Yeah, checking, sorry if I'm delaying in answering. I'm checking with our legal staff who are here in the room. And so no, there's been no additional information on that from our end.
Okay, I think that should be something that is communicated to, or at least figured out before it's communicated to the commissioners, because that is, I would say that would have a pretty big effect on the state of Florida if a potential lawsuit was brought. I mean, look at what happened to Massachusetts, and they had to rewrite their entire commerce law.
Okay. Thank you, Alyssa. Phil, your hand up again.
Yeah, quick point. I didn't catch exactly how Melissa said it, but she mentioned that it was brought up that a lot of species of reptiles are actually bred in Florida, and I just want to make sure that's pointed out correctly to the commissioners. I believe the point that was made was that there were more species of reptiles than fish that are bred in Florida, or a larger portion of our trade. So again, it certainly wasn't made that herpetoculture would be okay with interpretation number 2. It was just that a larger percentage of our species are bred in captivity versus aquaculture.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Please.
Phil, do you happen to know the percentage or even an estimate for
I don't.
reptile industry?
I don't even.
No
I could give you a best guess, but I don't even want to throw that out
That's
there.
okay.
All I know is it's a larger percentage than aquaculture. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sandy, you wanted to clarify something?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something Phil just said. A great majority of freshwater fish are bred in captivity, although they may not be bred in Florida.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. In order just to kind of keep us moving in time-wise, and since there are any additional hands, let me go ahead and ask staff to take the next section.
I'm still writing. Okay.
So give them a chance to finish writing that last note, and then
2 more seconds.
Yeah, Sarah's going to be going over the process discussion that we had. So.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So also at the last tag meeting, we discussed at length the risk determination process. So in each of these options, authorizations to import new species would not be issued until the FWC determines that the species poses an acceptable level of risk to Florida. And the proposed rules, the 2 options would include a risk determination process that outlines a petition process, initial screening, public engagement and comment, peer review, and timeframes. Petitions to evaluate a species or a group of species would require the submission of a bioprofile, species evaluation, and literature cited. And staff would review these petitions and conduct a full analysis of species risk if the initial screening indicates unknown or an unacceptable level of risk to Florida. Low-risk species may be authorized to be imported, provided that no other factors of concern are identified during the initial risk screening conducted by FWC staff. So as far as feedback on that whole process that we heard from the tag, I've got quite a bit here, so bear with me. So we heard this quite a bit. Several tag members voiced concern over the workload associated with the petition process, but had previously agreed that the onus should be on the petitioner to help gather this information. Some tag members are concerned that the full analysis of a species could take months to years to complete and that it is not sufficient for industry. Other tag members did not share this concern. At least one tag member that represented research stakeholder interest groups suggested FWC carefully consider the source map when using CliMatch to conduct any climate matching for a species. Tag members noted that there may be large groups of species that may have insufficient data for analysis, and that these data deficiencies for species would need to be addressed within the petition process, as the deficiencies may lead to uncertainty for how to evaluate risk. Timelines to minimize the number of petitions submitted in a year would help staff. Streamlining the process would be beneficial to petitioners and to staff. Option 2 would result in thousands of species that would need to go through the risk determination process and is not feasible. Some petitioners may need to hire or contract an expert to compile the petition information, and this may be cost prohibitive for industry, zoos, or other groups. Let's see. Some tag members believe that disease risk should be limited to novel disease or parasites, while others suggest that this is not the issue. Non-native species carrying or transmitting disease already present in Florida can still pose a problem when considering large facilities that may house and breed thousands of animals. The issue then becomes the volume of species that may harbor a disease or parasite. And regarding the actual petition process, timelines, and the full analysis, many tag members recommended FWC consider a rolling review of petitions, review as they are received, and allow submissions year-round. At least one tag member mentioned that we could consider a 90-day initial review of petitions after completed submission, similar to a permit application review process. We also heard that submission of additional petitions for species recently evaluated should be minimized unless new information is available. To consider non-scientists for the peer review stage. Several representatives would also like to see expedited review process as an option for species potentially beneficial to industry. And the last bit I have here is cannot put all species through this process. It's much too time consuming. Consider streamlining the process. So we heard that quite a bit.
Okay, so again, the staff's checking with you. Do they get that, capture your feedback accurately? Is there any clarification or anything that was missing that needs to be added to that? Ryan, you got your hand.
So one thing that is missing, I believe Sandy made the comment at the last tag that having the potential for a limited conditional status during the period of review, so that when they're applying for something, it'd be somebody with a conditional species permit or similar situation would be able to use it. It would not be in private hands, and therefore its ability to get out would be a lot more restricted, and you'd have some controls there. So I think that's one thing I saw missing.
Thanks, Ryan.
Not seeing another hand. Let me stop for half a second and note. Kate, I noticed that you've joined us. Your hand is now up. You may have a comment, and introduce yourself, please. Kate McCall?
Yes. Yeah. So thank you. I'm with the Humane Society of the U.S. and I am here. I was late. I know that, so sorry. But so just a comment on the petition process. We strongly support the petition process, and everything FWC staff and the group identified and reviewed at past several meetings is needed in documentation and process. support for the information on animal welfare, of course, conservation, illicit trade of the species, and documentation on disease or possible disease. So we felt like it was fairly streamlined. You know, the rolling process might make more sense. I don't know, either way, but what we have outlined and laid out and discussed at past meetings, we strongly support.
Appreciate that. Any other clarifications on this section? Chris Farrell.
I might have missed it, but just the comment that, like, to streamline the process and move this along, I'm not 100% sure the peer review, that extra chunk is necessary for all of these reviews. You know, it's something we can talk about during this rulemaking process, but you know, we're issuing tons of permits every day in the state of Florida, ERP permits, and that are having huge ecological consequences. And those are just decisions that are made, you know, with our permitting process and staff, and don't go through this extra step. So.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Jen Leon.
If we're going to, and I appreciate that Sandy's comment was brought up, but I just want to make sure that since that's going to be noted, that it is also noted that I had concerns and reservations about that recommendation. And I certainly think that if that recommendation is in any way proposed to the commission, it needs to be further fleshed out. That's not something that should just be proposed without a further discussion by the entire group, because it was brought up during discussion and we didn't really have a chance to thoroughly think about what that would mean. So I have strong reservations about that possibility. I know there's support for it, but I think we need a discussion about that. Again, I'm glad that that's brought up and that the commission might hear it, but likewise, then I would ask that my perspective on that be shared as well.
Appreciate that. Joe, you're next.
I think one of the things I mentioned at the last meeting that I don't believe was incorporated into the summary there, it's impossible to comment or be certain about what we think is the best approach on a petition process when we don't know what we're petitioning. We don't know the default categorization of the stuff that we're working with now. We don't know if we're working with interpretation 1, interpretation 2, or something else that is more practical than either of those. So until we have that solved, we're, you know, there's not enough information to have a good opinion on this.
Certainly would impact how you viewed it. Sandy, you need clarification?
Yeah, I would suggest that that it be presented to the commissioners which risk rating analysis that FWC is going to support, as well as the anticipated cost to industry to implement this.
Okay. Alyssa, I see you're nodding your head. You were next in. I'm not hearing you. You're still on mute, Alyssa.
Sorry. Trying to push too many buttons at once. But I would agree with Sandy that I do believe there should be, you know, a cost assessment that's presented to the commission in addition to this, you know, the potential hit to industry and the potential hit to what that means in terms of dollars into Florida, because I think that that's something that should be considered. I still have a question, though, for clarification on there. I do recall during the discussion of the process or screening, in the final stages, the presentation said, if the review indicates acceptable risk, species may be used in commerce, but there was a discrepancy in the way it was presented when staff told us, presented it as if it said, if review indicates acceptable risk, species can be used in commerce, and the presentation still says may be used in commerce. And I bring that up again because we moved from interpretation to options, and so, you know, phrasing clearly matters, and I want to make sure that it's not may be used in commerce, because that still allows for room for that species to not be used in commerce. It's not a definite, and I want to make sure that if it is a definite, that the language reflects that status and isn't leaving room for interpretation and leaving room for any question or wiggle room.
Okay, Sarah, you got a clarification?
Yeah, I just wanted to state again that portion because I think that's a fair point, Alyssa. What we were discussing previously, that low risk species may be authorized to be imported, but there's a caveat part to that, provided that no other factors of concern are identified during the initial risk screening conducted by FWC. I just wanted to just restate that.
Okay. All right. Alyssa, your hand's still up. Is that because you want to follow up on that, or is that okay?
I guess is that indicative in is that part of the finals? I'm referring to the final stages of that, and so that there's still then additional review that says if review indicates acceptable risk, species may be used in commerce. So there's then additional review after that, all the review. So in the final stages, after the review is done, there's then additional review that then applies before it can be done. So it's not in the final stages of process then. So it's not really final. I guess that's where I'm looking for clarification, because the way it's written up is it indicates that the species may be used after the final stage of review indicates acceptable risk, and then but there's additional review that then takes place by staff or by FWC or by commissioners. And if that's the case, I just want to make sure that that's fully written out, because again, I think it just helps if we're super clear.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. Gino, you're the last hand I have up here at the moment.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I still don't see where any of our existing BMPs fits in all the risk analysis that we already do for aquaculture, and still where do we fit in with FDACS? FDACS is the lead organization for aquaculture, so that none of that's been brought up. I guess the commissioners understand that FDACS is the lead organization for aquaculture, correct?
Yeah, I don't know. We have not discussed that with the commissioners, so I'm not aware.
I know that most of the commissioners never been to a fish farm, so I mean that would be the biggest thing is trying to get an answer that way. We do all those species that we farm raise right now have been through a risk analysis, and although we've talked about this at earlier meetings, we're at this point now, you know what I'm saying, where this has got to be brought up and talked about for aquaculture. So I think that's a big problem.
Thanks, Gino. Phil, question, clarification?
Yeah, absolutely. To follow up on Gino's point, so herpetoculture, the reptile world, witnessed this as we were going through prohibited species listings, where the commissioners were never properly educated on how the conditional species program worked. The reptile people tried to inform them as best we could in the 2 minutes that we were allowed to speak, but I do not recall staff ever properly educating the commissioners on how the conditional species program works. So to Gino's point, I haven't seen the commissioners be educated on FDACS and how aquaculture works through FDACS. So I think that certainly should be pointed up so that they can make an informed decision rather than just assuming that they may know how FDACS and aquaculture works.
Thanks, Phil.
I think Eugene might have been waving his hand.
Okay, Eugene, did you have a comment you wanted to add?
Yes, sir. So I'm listening to Sara talking about all these scientific reviews and everything else, and then she falls back on her caveat. Despite all the science, peer review, risk analysis, assessment, screening, all of that stuff, the caveat is if FWC, this is my understanding, this is what I heard back at our tag meeting, and I'm hearing it again today, that despite all the science, if we don't FWC like it, we're going to not allow it. And so, you know, that's not a good faith gesture. At some point in time, if there's a consensus that the screening, analysis, and all of these things, which has only been done on a very few number of species, justifies the existence of these animals to continue to be bred, sold, regulated, you know, in the Florida as well as throughout the rest of the country, it's very, very hard for us to move forward in good faith. And as we unanimously voted at the last meeting, that people were confused, do not feel like they can trust the leadership, not the people, because the people are great. Sara, Melissa, y'all are great gals, but it's the leadership and the intentions of where it's going. And those are the things that are really eroding us growing a relationship. Secondly, I did vote for a better understanding on interpretation 1, but now it's crystal clear to me that there's no intent to further any dialogue about how interpretation 1, which is now called option 1, would be, you know, discussed. So with that revealing information, I'm going to have to change my concern about interpretation 1, interpretation 2, whatever you want to call it. I'm a big hell no. I know we're not recording things, but I'm going to say what I feel and what I believe. And thirdly, in this discussion, and Melissa, I brought this up many, many times before the tag ever got started back in 21, there's no mention, veterinary services, zoonotic disease, the impact to agriculture, human health, or the environment. I will, in my limited time in May, be stressing that point. And Melissa, since I've got the floor for a minute, I would really encourage you to reach out to Commissioner Barreto and to Dr. Eason and request that the tag allotment time be given more than 1 hour. I mean, there's 20-something people on the tag. Don't know that all of them are going to show up in Miami, but those of us who are on the tag, you know, we should be heard if we're there. I know there's a lot of people from the public. They're going to have comments, and I hope that we don't get washed out. 1 hour for 20-something people barely gives us 3 minutes. And not that I want to prejudice the public, but I think, Melissa, you would agree that it's important for all of the commissioners, especially the new one, to hear what tag members have to say. We don't have much time. You have more time with them than we do. That's fine. But that's a request, and I don't know how the rest of you feel, but 1 hour of public comment is not going to be enough to address the tag, whether they're for or against any of these interpretations or options. So that's my concern moving forward. And these commissioners are not educated. They haven't visited anybody. I wish that they would. I wish, Melissa, you would invite some of these commissioners to come to a tag meeting. You know, I can remember tag meetings in the past where commissioners and legislative representatives would come to the tag meeting and watch the process and get a firsthand review of what stakeholders are concerned about. So I just want that noted, Hal, in our notes as you guys move forward. And sure. I'll mute myself.
Okay. Let's take the comments, Eugene. I feel you.
Go ahead.
Jen Leon, I'm going to let you have a comment. I do want to, for our time-wise, I know we got 2 more sections we really want to get to you and get you some opportunity to comment on. So, Jen Leon?
Yes, I need to unfortunately drop off, and I'm really apprehensive to do that because it sounds like we're trying to rewrite at least the last meeting, if not a few of the past meetings. And so I just want to make sure that at least FWC knows that just because everyone here is not reiterating everything we all said at every single meeting doesn't mean we don't continue to stand by what was said at those meetings. And I was very much under the impression that this was just going to be a meeting where you guys are speaking to us and we were just getting an idea of what you were presenting, not a meeting to, again, rewrite or re-clarify or be the squeaky wheel, so to speak, on particular concerns. I think we've all had a fair chance to voice our concerns, and I can't say to continue to reiterate those things. So I just ask that commission or that the agency Melissa, Sara, that you continue to fairly represent what all members of the tag have said, including the quieter members who just occasionally raise their hand or occasionally vote a certain way. We all have equal footing in this, and I think it's important that that's communicated. I hope the rest of this goes well. I look forward to seeing the recording. Kate is on the call now, and I fare you all well. And if I don't see you at the meeting, I'll see you guys at the next tag. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and ask. I'm sorry, Raphael.
I'm going to ask Jen to stay on for a moment.
I think she.
I just want to underline that the reason, FWC's reason for recapping some of the feedback that they thought they heard was to make sure they got it right. It's not an exhaustive recap, but to the extent that this discussion has highlighted things in that recap that needed to be adjusted, it's helpful. The intention is to accurately represent your input. And so
everyone's input.
Yeah, everyone's input. It's in the time available. So that was the reason for doing that. And unfortunately, the rest of the meeting is looking forward to what FWC will be saying. So you'll probably get that from Kate.
Yeah.
But
so let me go if I can. Let me go ahead and push us forward if I can, and ask staff to take up the next part.
Right. So a staff recommendation is just that, a staff. And I know how you said a couple of times feedback on that recommendation. I think that the feedback is really what we've already heard on options 1 and 2. So just for clarity, and so that you are aware, when we are at the commission meeting, we will be making the official staff recommendation of moving forward with option 1 and the risk process, so that we move those things into rulemaking. And again, I'm going to stress this is the very beginning process for rulemaking. This is the step where the commissioners say, yes, go forward, do your rulemaking workshops, continue to refine and hone and work on those. Within that, I would also say that we as staff would like to stress to the commissioners that we think that this could be a lengthy process, that we actually really do need time to spend on how these rules will impact the industry as well as impact staff and the work that we do. And so all of that is going to be part of, we'll make our recommendation, but we will talk about those things with our commissioners. And I also want to say that the work that we've done previously on tiers and a tier system, I think we as staff feel that that's very important to complete. And so what we would really like is to have an importation process and a tier system move forward at the same time. And so that would also impact that timeline discussion. So that is where staff are at with the recommendation based on what we have available at this time.
Okay.
And again, it's just the first step.
And you're asking them for any reaction to that, or just informing?
I really think we are largely informing on this, because this is one of those things where staff recommendation just is, and it's not something that we really have input on.
Okay. So in that case, would you like to then move on to looking at the clarity?
I think we really want to talk about the blacklist, because I think that is something that, Sandy's mentioned it and several other folks have mentioned it throughout this conversation, that it was brought up. And when we came back and started talking about the things that we had heard, it wasn't clear what everybody meant about blacklist and how they were looking at that within the tier structures that we had already talked about previously. So I think that that getting some clarity on that, so that again, when we're talking to the commissioners about all the options that the tag has considered, that we can accurately represent what that would mean. And we as a group had moved away from using the word blacklist to a not allowed list versus restricted use type list. And so I want to make sure that we're clear.
Yep, agreed.
What the tag means.
So I would request that anyone, at the last meeting that brought up this concept of a blacklist, if you don't mind, go ahead, raise your hand so Hal can call on you, and one by one, would really like to hear specifically, what do you mean when you use that phrase? There you go, hands.
You got 3 at least. Sandy, yours is the first one.
So what it means to me is a list of species that are disallowed, or species that are allowed on a conditional permit only, to be possessed, to be sold out of state only. because to enforce, you can enforce, you know, a few dozen species that the agents can easily identify, or you can whitelist thousands and thousands of species that they have to identify which are the ones that are not allowed.
Can I ask
Sure,
Sandy
please,
additional
clarification.
follow-up? Thank you, Sandy, for that. So I think when you say conditional, are you referring to the existing conditional species regulatory classification?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. And then when you state, you know, this could also be a list of species that are disallowed, can you elaborate further on that? Disallowed completely? Or, you know, like we've been using the term not, you know, a not allowed list or a not allowed category. Is that what you're referring to? Or do you mean something else, some more restrictive?
I mean, something that is right. So currently, under current law, you cannot possess piranha for any reason, right? But you can possess something that can be contained, like a freshwater stingray, and that can be contained and shipped out of state only. But FWC, with the conditional species permit, makes sure that the containment is proper for that animal so that it can't reach the natural waterways.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I fully understand. So I think for you, the phrase blacklist could incorporate, like, for example, current conditional regulatory classification, current prohibited classification, or something like the piranha, which is kind of a unique case where it's almost completely not allowed.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, you're next.
Thank you. So yeah, the big difference between a blacklist and a whitelist is, with a blacklist, the default is freedom. If it's not on the list, then it's permitted. If it is on the list, that doesn't mean it's completely prohibited, but that means there are conditions applied to that. That could be the same as our conditional species permit. That could be prohibited. That could mean a lot of things. But and the part of the goal of it is to make sure that your law enforcement officer have a smaller list of things they need to know, that if I see this animal, then there's tighter regulatory rules on it. And that's why today we have 205 species that are evaluated. Those are, and that way your law enforcement officers know, hey, if I see one of these 205 species, then I need to check. Say, does this person have the permit for this? Do they have the rights to have this? Or is this something that's completely illegal and nobody in the state should have, like a piranha? It's just, you know, I know there's a problem. So that's the goal of blacklisting. It doesn't necessarily mean a blanket level of control. It means that if it's not on this list, then it is allowed. And that's where I think you've seen so much division on where's the onus on, whether it's on the petitioner or on the agency, is, you know, I think for people looking at a blacklist system, they would say, look, if generally things are allowed, then the agency can look at it and say, or, you know, then we can say, hey, somebody coming in and saying this needs to be banned needs to come in with a good reason for it. But if you're saying everything is disallowed and you have to ask for permission to have it in the first place, then we'd say, well, you should have a reason to say no, so you should be putting that in there. So that's the big. Is that a clear understanding of the difference between black and white list?
Yes, thank you, Ryan, for your interpretation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joe?
I think Sandy and Ryan covered it reasonably well, but yeah, blacklist, not necessarily being just prohibited species, but essentially including what we already have as conditional for aquatics in Florida. What we used to have for Burmese pythons and retics that went away, were conditional would still be included with that, and allow for commerce but out of state, allow for possession with disaster plans and caging requirements and whatnot. But I think all of that stuff is sort of under the general heading of a blacklist, which I mean we've seen in the last month the pretty significant problems that law enforcement can have with identification of things like boas and pythons, and we had the same concern expressed by Major Burton a couple months ago at a tag meeting, that a extensive whitelist would be extremely difficult for law enforcement to be familiar with.
Jeff Turner, you're next.
I'd like to expand a bit, which I did in the very beginning of this tag meetings. If industry has an item that they believe that they'd like to put on the blacklist, as I said literally at the first meeting, and I'll list those right off. It's proactive versus reactive. Crown of thorns starfish, Australian box jellyfish, blue ring octopus. I've mentioned this several times. Industry needs the ability to work with the state and FWC to come forward and say, hey, we don't really think those items should be aquaculture. They shouldn't be in trade, and we don't want them to be released into the waters of the state of Florida. That's another interpretation of a blacklist. There's got to be a channel and an avenue for us to almost, make this recommendation to staff, to FWC, and shut down something that we think is a problem.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Phil?
Yeah, moving forward with this, I understand that staff and the people in the office and the commissioners may be viewing this one way, but we never talk about the practicality of any of this, and practicality comes down to law enforcement. Law enforcement needs a huge amount of input on this because staff and the commissioners are not going to be out in the field trying to enforce however this proceeds. It's going to be law enforcement officers. And what's practical is to focus on the species that we're concerned with. So, for example, piranhas versus pacus. I mean, we brought up piranhas, and a lot of people confuse pacus with piranhas. I mean, most people can easily tell them apart. Boas versus pythons, another one. So we need to keep the list as small as possible so that it's practical when law enforcement is out in the field, and whether they're following up on a call or they're doing an inspection. Again, we need to keep that list as small as possible, and going with a white list, a broader approach just is not practical at all.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Kate, your hand was up.
Hi there. Yeah, just briefly, I just want to reiterate that there is support among the TAG members for a whitelist. And commission meetings going back a few years, leadership, the commissioners have specifically mentioned a whitelist for a while. And the reason we are here is they're looking to improve regulations. Obviously, we all know that, but minimize the risk of non-natives becoming established. So that's the goal, and among other things. But I'm worried that that your takeaway, or that relaying the discussions, will just be for some of the TAG members and not representing all of them. So we really strongly feel like a whitelist is important for the goals at hand. And again, they've mentioned it several times. So I just wanted to add that to the mix so that the conversation at the last meeting maybe doesn't get overshadowed by today's discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Jeff Hill.
Dave's got his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dave Arnold. I'm going to go first with Dave Arnold.
I think that the concept that's kind of going round and round here is who has the burden of proof for any species to be allowed in the future. And so far, up until this point in time, the burden of proof has always been on the regulatory agency to have some way to say a species is not desirable in the state of Florida. And as a result, we are where we are today. And I think Jeff excellently pointed out that there are species that can come into Florida today that should not come into Florida. So I think where the commissioners are at is we need to just take a great big pause and say nothing else comes into the state of Florida unless it has been proven to be okay. And one of the biggest ways to prove it's okay is because it's already here. It's been through some level of screening already. It does not present a problem. We don't want to worry about those things. So amount of energy and effort that can be put into explaining all of the 20 or 30,000 things that are already here and on the problem is a great use of our time. And then when somebody says, hey, I have a new fish, I have a new lizard, it's not going to be a problem, and here's why. I think that approval process should be something that's quick and very simple. And I think everybody is afraid of the great unknown instead of realizing that we cannot tackle this problem unless we stop bringing things in that have not been sufficiently evaluated. So to me, we're all talking about the same thing. None of us want bad things here, but the question is, how do we stop them from getting here? And I think what the commissioners are saying is, let's just don't let them in until they're okay. So, Jeff Hill.
So we've had several discussions over time, and this was brought up a few minutes ago about the practicality of doing these things. And I think the issues with the white list or the clean list or whatever you want to call that list, we've discussed that, and it's a very difficult thing to do on a large scale. You know, what is acceptable, what is not. It's going to be very difficult for the officers to determine what species. You know, when I had a fish farm and was inspected years and years and years ago by the Game and Fish Commission, the Lieutenant Reynolds came by my farm and he walked around and looked at all of my tanks, and he was looking for tilapia, he was looking for, you know, piranhas, he was looking for a short, relatively short list of species that are easy to identify and that are clearly regulated. I didn't have any of those because I was just an ornamental fish, I had no effluent. It took him very little time and effort to go through my farm and deal with it. If he, on the other hand, he had to go through and figure out whatever species of fish was on my little farm, I was a little bitty player in all this, it would have taken him hours to go through my tanks because I had African cichlids that were brand new to the hobby. I had stuff straight out of Africa a lot of times that, you know, with some of the early importations. He didn't know what they were. I mean, a lot of people who raised African cichlids didn't know what they were. So, you know, that they were in trade because that's where I got them. But, you know, so there's a lot of difficulties there. But the bigger picture is, you know, I have to kind of bring up what Gino has been bringing up quite a bit, is that where is FDAX in all this? So suddenly FWC goes to a white list, clean list, again, whatever you want to call it. Now what's FDAX going to do? They enforce a dirty list. And so are they going to look at one thing, and then are they going to be FWC inspectors that come to fish farms now and spend, how long would it take to go through Segrest in a day and identify every single fish that's in there, even though there's a label on it? It would take me hours and hours to go through there. And I know fish really, really well in the industry. I don't think that you're going to have a system. I don't think that you know, we're doing a lot of speculating about what the commissioners are thinking. So I'm going to do that too. I don't think they have an idea the number of species and the complexity of identifying a clean list across the board. I just think it's going to be a disaster. And, you know, then you got herps, you got large mammals, you got birds, all these things that are going to have to be looked at. So I think it's going to set up FDAX and FWC for just additional conflict, and who knows what's going to happen. And that's a real issue too. I mean, if you're going to think about harmonization and practicality, you got two different agencies there suddenly going to be looking at it and inspecting facilities in different ways. So anyway, my thoughts on that.
Okay. Chris, you're the remaining hand.
And Eugene.
And Eugene, I'll come to you. Let me get Chris, and then I'll come back to you, Eugene. I can't see your hand up, Eugene. So Chris, and then Eugene.
Eugene's using the old-fashioned, the actual hand. So, I wanted to point out, I mean, I understand that if the idea was that law enforcement inspections were the only way to enforce a whitelist, then I would totally agree with the problems that have been mentioned today and at previous meetings. But I just want to point out that a lot of our environmental laws, especially the ones I have to deal with, it's not through enforcement that, it's the fact that they're the law, it's on the books, and companies know that they need to operate according to these laws. So if people were importing things that they knew weren't in the whitelist, they know that if they're advertising those for sale and they're putting it on bills of lading and things like that there would be a paper trail showing that they were working in, with a species that wasn't allowed at that time. To say it would only be successful if law enforcement can go out and identify people who are importing species they shouldn't be, that kind of assumes that people are going to ignore the law and just do whatever they want, unless so it's a little there's a lot of our environmental protections that you can't develop where we have gopher tortoises, and you're expected to make sure you do surveys, and it's not that FWC is out there checking everybody's property before they get developed. So I think this would be something worthy of discussion. What are the pros and cons, and what would be difficult? But I think that just having it, a whitelist be the law of the land would, could possibly have a lot of benefits without having to, worry about the level of inspection.
Thanks, Chris. Eugene, and then I have Phil and Ryan. But Eugene, you're next.
So talking about who's responsible for, doing the work, I really feel like something new ought to take place. And I think both regulatory agency, whether it's FDAX or FWC or somebody in aquaculture or somebody in the reptile industry, I think the appropriate people need to work together instead of pointing fingers at each other, join hands and do this together, because there's no way that the regulatory agency is going to know as much about the industry. And those of us who might want to be bringing in a new species are probably going to find, it's my guess, and maybe Dr. Hill can elaborate this, especially on the aquaculture side, because I'm concerned about everything in aquaculture. And in terms of, I'll bet you there's already the family or the genus of a species that's in trade. So I don't think moving forward that we're going to find some totally new family or genus that that has a place in the trade. I'm probably wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking right now from a reptile point of view that if there was a new species that we wanted in trade and it was going to be scalable and it was going to be a good fit for people to have and enjoy, or even for research or things of those natures, chances are we've already laid the foundation and the groundwork. And so I think we need to just back off a little bit on this thing as far as trying to do a collaborative effort and not criticize, but work together on this thing to remove the argument by agreeing together. Secondly, I know a lot of you out there are just hell-bent on a whitelist, but you can forget about it. I really don't see it moving forward. And we're talking about economies, we're talking about jobs. And I think that there can be a better situation moving forward instead of there being such advocacy for or against, kind of a gray area of stuff. In other words, the blacklist works because it's definitive. But those of you who really want the whitelist, who really drives home the message that you don't want anybody to have anything, including yourself, is just not going to fly because of the hundreds of millions of dollars and countless generations have been invested. So those of us who are in industry, whether it's reptile or avian or bird or mammal, feel the pressure of a gun pointing us in the head. And, I'm sitting here listening to all of you people, and it seems like a wildlife agency is trying to get into the agricultural business, and the only thing missing at this tag meeting is somebody from the cattle industry. So that may aggravate you, but I'm looking at the big scope of things. And this is my fourth, no, I've had 3 technical advisory groups. This is my first technical assistance group. And we've always had collaborative efforts in the proper perspective. But this party has gotten so big. And like I said at the last meeting, we're caught up in a political situation, and a lot of really good, law-abiding, sincere people that care about the environment are going to get hurt if we're not careful. So I'm listening. I'm taking notes. This is going to be an interesting meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Phil and then Ryan.
Yeah, so Chris Farrell brought up a good point. You know, there is more than law enforcement and inspections that go into this, but, you know, we also got to think about, we're not talking about the people on this tag or the people who make their presence known at commission meetings. You know, all those are the most responsible people who are showing up and they're going to follow the law. But what you got to worry about is the more draconian and overreaching something gets, the more criminals you're going to have pop up. We see it every day with turtles. I mean, we just keep doing this process of listing turtle species as endangered and think that's solving the problem because people are going to stop poaching them, and it's the opposite of what happens. So every time we take a step towards being more overreaching, you know, the prices on those species drive up. You get more people popping up and creating a bigger black market. So, you know, if we limit this to the whatever 50 species that have been reviewed by FWC, what's going to happen is all the people that FWC knows about, those people are not going to work with species not on the white list, but you're going to have 1,000+ people pop up working with the other species because FWC is not going to know about them. They're not going to be regulated, and you're actually causing more biosecurity risk by going that route.
All right, Ryan, you're the last hand I have up at the moment.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, I mean, Chris mentioned that, you know, you'll know if you're advertising something that's not on the white list, and I don't think that's what people are concerned about is what they're advertising. The concern is that a lot of species that look very similar, it's possible for an officer to come in and say that they don't believe that's the species on the white list. They think that it's a species that's not on the white list. And the concern is that, you know, you'll have officers euthanizing animals by mistake because they don't understand which one it is. And so that's a big concern there. You know, we can talk about implications of all of that and everything else, but I think that's some of the things people are worried about.
All right. Sarah, Melissa, anything else in terms of this?
No, appreciate the clarification and discussion.
Okay. All right. We've kind of run through all of the specific items in the agenda, and as has been pointed out, I think you've had plenty of opportunity to not only clarify but reiterate your comments and concerns, and that's appreciated, staff, and we've been taking lots of notes as well. So what I'd like to do is sort of just go back through before we kind of wrap up today, and I'll just go through because it appears to me in an alphabetical order and go through. I'm sorry.
This list,
okay.
Part of that list you don't see on.
Okay, well, I figured out how to see the rest of the list that I didn't see earlier today. But all right, I'll just sort of kind of go down the list, a handwritten list I've got here that's more by categories. And I'll ask if there's a comment or question that hasn't been addressed today. I don't mean this really is, if your comment's already been captured, I don't want to make you feel like you've got to reiterate a position that you've already had an opportunity to state. But is there something you didn't get to say, something that may be missing, or some concern you think needs to be raised that we haven't heard yet today? So just kind of going down by categories that I have here. Jeff Turner, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make, or you feel free to pass if you'd rather?
I would highly recommend that everybody come down to Miami and go to this FWC meeting and make a statement on behalf of your area of expertise on the TAG working group. I think FWC Commission is going to want to hear from us, and we need to be there.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Gino, any new or additional comment that you don't feel you've been able to express yet? Pass if you'd rather.
No, I mean, you know, my whole thing is where's FDEX in this, and we've got everything already set up. The only thing that I would say that was missed there is the word cultured instead of possessed on the blacklist.
All right, thanks, Gino. Dave Rollins.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I want to touch on. The white list is, to start with, is not enforceable, and I've been shipping fish all over the country for 40 years, and a lot of states you ship into, some companies have been forced to hire someone to do nothing but to follow their DNR's brand new regulations to make sure they don't get in violation by bringing in something they've been selling for years. We had this issue before with the channel apple snail across the country. The policy Burgess the spike top was legal. The channel apple snail was not. But the DNR people, the enforcement people around the country were unaware of how to tell the difference. So they went into shops and distributors and forced them to euthanize hundreds of thousands of animals only because they couldn't tell the difference. And we have that scenario going on here. And when you have a blacklist, you can go to that list and say, okay, this animal is prohibited, I can't have it. With a white list, it becomes virtually impossible to comply with the law because you don't know what you don't know what you can or can't do. And it's just not feasible to continue with a white list and stay in business. So and in the past, the ornamental fish industry and aquaculture in general was regulated by a whole lot of agencies, including FWC, none of which communicated, none of which cared what the other thought. They all make their own regulations, and it became virtually impossible to do business in the state of Florida and comply with all of the agencies. So the FDAX was formed and implemented under a series of stakeholder meetings, including FWC, and then the BMPs were created and set into rules so that they could be enforceable. And now we're back to having multiple agencies trying to regulate something. And no offense, but there's a lot of things we do you guys are not familiar with, you've never seen, you don't understand it because you've never seen it. And so it's not a matter of ignorance, because I hate that word. It's just a matter of a lack of knowledge. And it's going to be extremely harmful to our industry if you're not really, really careful. You can shut down a very large industry. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Ryan, anything else we haven't already heard?
No, Hal, I think I've covered it.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Marty, anything you feel you need to add?
Yeah, I think, and hopefully correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing from staff is that, and this is just my personal opinion, is that they're going to recommend to the commission the option one. It felt like they're not willing or able to maybe all of our comments. I know we don't work on an advisory component. It feels like our comments are falling on deaf ears. I think again, we're not naive people here. We know the difference between a white and a black list. I think that all we're going to do in the end is create an environment where these fish, if they're on a prohibited list or not available in Florida, they're gonna come in. They're going to be brought in at Atlanta and Georgia and just driven or sent into the state via the U.S. Postal Service. I think the means don't justify the end on what we're trying to do. I mean, we're all law-abiding business people and citizens. We share the same end that, we want to protect the environment in Florida. We want to protect the natural resources. And I just don't think the way we're doing it's going to help that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marty. Eugene, anything we haven't heard that you felt need to be added?
I just want to say one thing to the group, and I'm going to say it very cautiously, very lovingly, and very American. Whether you're an environmentalist or an animal rights or an animal welfare or whatever label that people slap on us or pro-industry or whatever it is, I just encourage everybody on this technical assistance group and everybody in the public that's out there listening to get involved with your state representatives, your House member and your state senator. Let them hear your concern about the direction that Florida is going in, because they're the ones, folks, that are footing the bill, whether we come up with something good or something that doesn't come good. Every stakeholder, every citizen, every taxpayer in this state, I implore you, get off your butt and do something politically in terms of helping both sides be mandated to come together with something that's going to work. So, I mean, if we're all dead, then nothing happens. But if we can some way, somehow come with a life-producing compromise, then I think we can survive. Because industry is not against regulation to those folks who think that we're horrible. We are in favor of regulation. We're also in favor of seeing people care and consume and enjoy the privileges of the state of Florida. You know, you saw that video with Governor DeSantis over in Japan, and his children went to some petting zoo in Japan or some store or something like that, and him and his wife are having an owl encounter, which I thought was really cool, that his kids get to touch and feed and play with owls. Is there any place in Florida where our governor and his beautiful wife and his beautiful children could have that kind of experience with an owl, with a reptile, with a fish, with a mammal? So just food for thought. Have a great day.
Okay. Thanks, Eugene. Phil, any additional comments we haven't already heard that you feel you need to add before we wrap up today?
Yeah, so certainly the commissioners are up there and we all understand how, you know, FWC is set up and what role the commissioners serve, but we also got to think about what their background is. And I hope that, you know, staff will present if there are issues. Just because a commissioner comes up with an idea doesn't mean it's practical or it's going to work. You know, I'm not sitting up there telling them how to develop land. And I can only imagine if every idea that a bunch of land developers have, we wouldn't have a gopher tortoise or any other endangered species left up there. So again, I know they sat up there and had an idea about how FWC and the various animal industry should operate, but it doesn't mean they were correct or it doesn't mean it's reasonable what they said.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Sandy, any additional comments?
Yeah, so my additional comments would be that where they have been implemented, whitelists have been wholly ineffective at preventing the release of non-native species into the environment. And if that's the goal, shouldn't the goal be messaging out to the people that are most apt to do that, which is to the end consumer and to the new people that are moving into the state? Whitelists are industry killers where they have been implemented, and the people on this call and the people within the industry want to protect the environment, but we're going to be put out of business by this.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Joe, any additional comments you feel you need to add?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I understand, Sarah, Melissa, you're stuck in a spot of presenting the assistance from the entire tag, and obviously we're not all on the same page on this. If we're looking at a whitelist being presented as the best option at the commission meeting in Miami, I want to be clear, that's over the objections of our industry. We do feel, while we're in the room, we're trying to contribute, and I appreciate you listening to us, but I want to be clear that if that's presented, that's not presented as what the reptile industry feels is an appropriate way to deal with this. You know, whitelist is going to lead to more mistakes from law enforcement. Your agency is going to have more situations arise like what we just saw with Bill McAdam, and I know nobody wants anything like that to happen again. And having something other than a blacklist of things that should be easily identified, we're probably going to see that come up again.
All right, thanks, Joe. Alyssa.
Thanks. I would say, you know, I agree with what Joe said, but I do think that in kind of pulling back and looking at the big picture and looking at what we were tasked with trying to do, any attempt to really implement a whitelist, I don't think is going to be as effective as what was originally set out, which was, you know, I know all the way back in the June 2022 meetings, we were talking about avoiding terms like whitelist or safe list because it could be confusing and because anything like that could cause confusion. And we were looking to really cut down on that and looking at creating some, you know, standards that were able to be followed both by the industry and by the people in Florida, so we could reduce kind of people releasing their animals and also reduce things coming in, while protecting the ability for
people to have pets and protecting the industry. So I think that, echoing what Sandy said, really a whitelist isn't something that would be workable. And in the places that we've seen attempts to try and do it, we've either seen those attempts fail, and we've seen, because industry and everything has really been killed, or we've seen the state really recognize that it's not a workable solution and pull themselves back and go back to the drawing board, which, in this case is something I think we could recommend to the commissioners, in that listen to the experts and the folks around the table and go back to the drawing board, and let's really refocus with what the mission was supposed to be, and not move forward with kind of hastily reworked goals, which is really what it seems to be. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you. Kate McFall, any additional comments?
Sure, just to chime in, 2 things. I mean, we, like many of y'all, see kind of a combination. There's a lot of things in option 1 that we like, also option 2, perhaps soon thereafter. But as you guys know, we do support the whitelist. And I remember early on, I think like Alyssa was just saying, we did talk about it, and I did some digging into other states, and I heard what has been said. I'd like to see some verification on that, on industry in some of the other states. And I'm not sure. I think that in many of those states, industry is still active, but the industry folks are certainly more knowledgeable about those industries. But I'd like to just kind of summarize that. But I do recall talking about this early on, and we do feel like it's certainly maybe not right away, but in step 2, that's something that should be seriously considered. And from listening and attending every meeting, it seems like leadership is there. But there's a lot of parts of option 1 and 2 that we support. And my ask is that when you convey this to leadership, that you represent all of us, and we're not the loudest, I know, and there's more industry individuals here and voicing their opinions, and we appreciate that, and that's why it's a dynamic, interesting group. But we don't want to just be, overshadowed. And so, if you would present, this is the summary, but others, so this over here was an option as well. Just not to, we have a place here too. So I appreciate being, included. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. John Brangan.
I will pass. I think everybody has covered it well.
Okay, thanks, John. Lynn McDuffie, any additional comments you feel need to add? Lynn's still on. Lynn McDuffie, anything you want to add, or you want to pass?
I'm passing.
Thanks, Lynn. John Sajik.
Yeah, I just want to say that the last tag meeting, we were presented with interpretations of what we think, what staff thought the commissioners wanted. And although we had partial agreement with interpretation 1 and disagreement and totally not wanting option 2, there was room for discussion for a third interpretation. However, now I'm hearing that this has now turned into an option that is going to be presented to the commissioners. So that I thought that was not well presented and well hashed out. And lastly, I would support a blacklist rather than a whitelist, because we all know that whitelists have always been ineffective. And that's my comments.
All right. Thank you, John. Christy Despain.
It's been covered, so I'll pass.
Thank you, Christy. Appreciate that. David Arnold, anything you need to add?
I know that one of my sources of great confusion is because Portia Sapp from DAX came and talked to our tag group, And I have clearly recorded that she indicated that the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services does a preliminary risk assessment on any new thing which is requested to be brought into the aquaculture business. So if she was telling the truth, and if that's the current case, I don't think that any species that is currently in aquaculture is at any risk whatsoever. And I believe that that's the kind of list that we're seeking for all the other species as well, that some kind of assessment has been done. So I'm going to try and get hold of her, when we get finished, and find out if I misunderstood her, because I believe DAX is doing exactly what FWC is requesting be done. They're saying this species is not a risk. You can safely aquaculture it in Florida. And I think that's a really good way to go. So I'm going to try and get clarification from her.
Thank you, David. Chris Farrell.
I'll just quickly say that, I'm hoping that, now we're going to get some text on paper and some proverbial tires to kick. Maybe that'll help us. Sometimes I think in these discussions, when they are a little open-ended and we don't have words on paper, everybody kind of imagines the worst. And so, I'm not sure when people are saying that, these, draconian regulations that would put everything out of business. It's like, well, I'm imagining something that's a little more, we've heard your concerns, and we want to come up with something that meets everybody's needs the best we can. There's going to have to be trade-offs on both sides. We're not going to have the absolutely lock down the environment most secure regulation, which would be to stop everything, because that would be bad for a million reasons. But we can't just shy away from any type of regulation, because we do have all these environmental needs that have to be met. So hopefully we can get to specifics and maybe be able to interact with this a little bit more. And if we go something that's and we can look at the failures of other places or what people have seen a week, and maybe it's some hybrid-y kind of thing where you get between a whitelist and a blacklist somehow, whether that's taking a whitelist and adding a bunch of genera or families. Some discussions we've had before that we think are good enough and wouldn't need some of this heightened review process, or you take a blacklist and maybe we look at adding a few problematic genera or families that would need some kind of review before you add within those specific taxonomic groups. I don't know, but I'm just hoping we can maybe at least this will. Some people think maybe it's a little rushed, but I think maybe it'll just give us some details so we can get a little more specific in our comments and deliberations with one another. And then finally, a quick note to address what Eugene said. Anybody wants an owl encounter or eagles or hawks or kites or other fabulous birds of prey, please go to the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey in Maitland, Florida, when you're driving on your way to Disney World.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mike Kirkland, any final comments?
Hi, so this has been, a valuable discussion, but I haven't heard anything that's changed my stance from the last tag meeting. No option is going to be perfect, but I have to support whichever path leads to the most environmental protection, the least amount of risk. Just because, and so for the options we've been given, that's going to be option one, and it's going to be for the whitelist. Just because something is challenging doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. That's all I have.
Thanks, Mike. Art Roybal, any final comments?
Yeah. See if I can turn on my camera here. I've said in the past that I do feel that FDAX should be at the table, since I don't think FWC or anyone at the table there wants duplication of regulation. I must have missed the presentation of FDAX to the tag meeting, because I was at I only have missed one meeting, so I must have missed that one. But I do feel that they should be at the table. Chris, you said it well. I do feel that we need something on paper. I was hoping today that you might have been able to share, that both options. I'm a little confused now. What's included in both options? So that would have been good to share a Word document so everyone could have seen that. I am a little on Chris's side too, where we could maybe combine a blacklist and a whitelist. I do know that blacklists work, whitelists have some problems. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Art. We have three more to hear from. Jenny Novak.
Yeah, so most people have covered everything that I would have said. I do appreciate everyone's comments today, and now I'm not really sure which option I would think the county, Miami-Dade County, would support. I really need to take some time and think some more about all of this, but I do appreciate everyone's input.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Christina Romagosa.
Yeah, I don't have anything in particular to add. There's been a lot of information and a lot of insights, but yeah, not anything that hasn't been covered or discussed already.
Thank you, Christine. Jeff Hill, any final comments?
Just one. So FWC has a commission system, and commissioners have to make decisions on everything from, do you extend the hours of turkey season in one particular WMA, to are you shutting down a fishery for the rest of the year? And so again, they don't know everything, obviously, that they need to know for every single one of these decisions that they have to make. So they rely heavily on staff. I don't mean this in a bad way, mean way to anyone, but I think it's behooves staff to present them with options. And one option that they think they heard from the commissioners, and we've had a lot of discussion about, I don't think covers the range. I think you brought up the idea of the tier system a little bit in the discussion, maybe midway through the meeting. And it seemed to me, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but it seemed to me that we were kind of converging on a modified tier system as what the tag would like to see, or we can't recommend, I guess. But I know that if I was a manager at that kind of level and was asked to make decisions about aspects that I'm not an expert in, I would want staff to give me as much good quality information and as many options as possible. So again, that's my thoughts on good governance and management, but we're stuck with the system that we have, and we got to work within that system. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We're pretty hard up on our time, but I do want to note, as we promised earlier, I don't have a way to project this or post this, but I'm going to read out an email address. We appreciate the public who's been listening in this time. I'll read out an email address. If you have comments that you want to submit, this would be the best way to do it. And the email address is nonnativespeciesrules, all one word, at myfwc.com. That's nonnativespeciesrules, again, all one word, at myfwc.com. Okay. With that, Alyssa, you have a hand up. I'll let you have that last comment before I turn it over to staff. Is there one last?
I just actually had a question, and this might be answered by staff. I was just going to ask what if you had any specifics of the next steps for, what you're presenting to the commissioners, and kind of what time and length of, any of kind of what we've been asking about in terms of processes
if you'd be asking for any like clarification from them. Really just asking if you had any specifics on, you know, staff's next steps on what they're going to be presenting to commissioners, kind of how they're going to be presenting it. And I think that would be informative for those of us who are planning on attending the meeting and have been involved in this process.
Yeah, and I can just say we're still in the process of putting everything together. It is not together, so I don't have a lot of answers for you, but that is one of the things that I found very valuable from today is making sure and clarifying that we had that feedback. I heard multiple times, and I think that we do need to stress this, that you are all individuals and you are all also representing your groups, and there is no consensus on this issue, and that the commissioners need to be aware that we've got 20 people plus with multiple opinions and nuances within your opinions on this issue.
Okay. Again, we're really hard up on our time. Phil, your hand is up. It's the last one we'll take before I let staff sort of close this out.
Yeah, super quick. Is this video going to be posted and made available, or do we have to request this footage?
Yeah, we recorded largely for our own benefit of note taking and being able to have something to go back and look at, but I don't have a preference on that. I'm looking at legal.
If they request it, it'll be a public record, but I don't know if we have any plans to put it in that format before it's a request.
Okay. So Phil, I think the answer is you can request it. They'll investigate whether or not it can be kind of posted and made accessible on a broader basis. Any closing comments, Sara or Melissa?
Just again, thank everyone for dedicating another 2 hours to discussing this with us, and I do hope to see many of you at the commission meeting in Miami.
Likewise, thanks everybody for your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your patience. Wanted to be sure everybody on the tag had a chance to get their words in. So again, thank you very much. Y'all have a good day.